Dick Harpootlian as one of the attorneys who represented Alec Murdaugh during his murder trial and as a longtime figure in South Carolina law and politics.
That's right. Today, he is going to be sharing his perspective on the latest developments in the case, including questions about former clerk of court Becky Hill, as well as his new book, which is talking about another high-profile case. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's go ahead and start off what happened, as we mentioned earlier this week. Former Colleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill. She's pled guilty to obstruction of justice, perjury, and misconduct in office, avoiding that jail time, but didn't say anything about with tampering the jury. So kind of where do we go from that, and is that something that we're going to be hearing a bit more of in February?
On February 11th at 9:30 in the morning, we're going to be arguing Alec Murdaugh's appeal of his murder conviction. And that is There are two pieces of that. One is the underlying trial, whether certain evidence should have been allowed in or kept out, all the sort of legal issues you encounter in any trial. But this has another piece, which is I've never encountered before, and I've been doing this a long time, I never heard about before, and that is an allegation of jury tampering by the clerk of court. Now, jury tampering in the context we're talking about isn't necessarily a criminal act. It's the clerk of court expressing opinions about the credibility or guilt of the defendant. And Judge Toll, who had a hearing on this, found that she made such comments. What happened this week was, did the evidence to support those comments rise to the level of a crime? And the solicitor said, Rick Hubbard, who's an excellent prosecutor, said, there were a number of different statements by a number of different people which he felt would compromise his ability to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. But that would no way affect what we're going to be doing on February 11th. Two different issues, two different standards. And the question on February 11th is whether she said those things. Judge Toll found that she did. And Judge Toll, we believe, all due respect, made a mistake saying that we had to show that it affected the verdict. There's a federal case called Remmer, which the United States Supreme Court gave a decision that was the basis of that, but that's the most recent decision, which says all we have to show is that the jury was exposed to those kinds of comments or conduct, and it would be wrong to go behind the jury's deliberations to go into that and say to a juror, did it make a difference to you? You can't do that. So we're not confident, but we feel we have a really good argument that he ought to get a new trial based on what she did, what Judge Toll found she did.
And this is a very high-profile case. I feel like everyone is always following all the latest details. When it comes to the appeals process, you just touched on that. For Alec Murdaugh arguing for a new murder trial, is there any information that you think folks should know that you're able to share with us?
Well, I mean, it's all in the filings. It's public information if you wanted to read through several hundred pages of briefing. But basically, the argument we have is that the 2.5 weeks of financial crimes were not related to the murder, and they should not have been allowed in. You know, after 2.5 weeks of hearing how he stole money from widows and orphans and paraplegics and mentally handicapped people, I mean, everybody in the courtroom hated him. And so then when they began the murder prosecution, nobody was listening to him or believing anything he had to say. And so we think that it's called a 404 rule of evidence 404 analysis. 403. Did the probative value outweigh the prejudice? And we say no. There are a number of other evidentiary issues involving everything from ballistics to cell phone analysis, and those will be argued in full. But the Becky Hill piece is, and I got to say, I have been doing this almost half a century, maybe half a century, and I've been around dozens of clerks of court, and all of us assume the clerk is unbiased and helping both sides and doing that's the job and making sure the jurors are comfortable. Never crossed our minds during the trial that she was doing anything untoward until we got sort of to the point where she was finding stuff being posted and attributing it to jurors that that just wasn't true. That post had nothing to do with that juror, and that became concerning. But we still didn't see the full picture until after the trial, and we went around. Jim Griffin and I and Phil Barber and Holly Miller in my office went around, driving dirt roads in my Mercedes out there, knocking on doors of jurors and saying, did Becky Hill ever say anything to you? Oh yeah. And so that's how that got developed. I'm really proud of our inability to let it go. Look, Alec Murdaugh is not my friend, he's my client, but every client deserves that kind of aggressive representation. Will he get a new trial? That's going to depend on what at least three of the 5 Supreme Court justices decide after the arguments on February 11th. But Becky Hill pled guilty to perjury this week. She lied to Judge Toll during that hearing. And if she lied about that specific thing, they proved she lied about giving copies of sealed pictures to the media, and she lied about allowing people into her office after hours. And they proved through key cards and others that she lied about that. And if she lied about that, what else did she lie about? So this is again a unique, unprecedented, extraordinary case. We've already started studying for February 11th, and we will. It's going to be a very, very intense 2 or 3 hours.
You also mentioned the financial crimes as well. We actually had the opportunity to speak to other prominent attorneys as well here, and they said that was a major error in the case back then as well.
Well, we think that, but Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is a Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, once said, when asked, how he thought the law would be defined on something, he said, "Look, the law is what we say it is, we the court, and so the law will be whatever they say it is." And look, these I have no complaints about this Supreme Court. They've been extraordinarily aggressive in allowing us to examine the Becky Hill issue, for instance, to allow us to go the extra mile. And I believe they're going to give a decision they believe is the right decision. And I'm a big believer in the rule of law. That's how you do what I've done for so long, is you've got to believe that the system is not rigged. You've got to believe, well, and of course we found out Becky rigged it, but that we're going to fix that. We're going to correct that. And he's going to get another trial, I hope. But you got to believe in the system and the integrity of the people on the bench especially, and prosecutors and defense lawyers. There are rules. And if you abide by them, this is the greatest job in the world. You don't help your client make up a story that's better than his story. Or if you're a prosecutor, you don't hide evidence or help the cops testify around a problem. It's as long as you're doing that, you can go home every night like I do, put my head down on the pillow and go to sleep, not worry about it.
From one high-profile case to another, let's talk about your new book. And for folks at home who don't know about Pee Wee Gaskins, tell us about how they're going to be on the edge of their seats. And this is all real.
It's all factual, and the reason it is, first of all, let me tell them a little bit about Pee Wee. Gaskins lived over in the Florence, PD area, Sumter, Florence, Lake City, and he grew up in a very troubled way. His mother thought that because he drank some turpentine when he was like 2 years old, it messed him up. I don't think that's it. I do think that he was sexually abused at a very young age, and because of that had these rages. When he was 12, he was caught by the next door neighbor's daughter breaking in a house. She threatened to call the sheriff or the police or whatever, and chased him out of the house, and he picked up an axe and hit her in the head, almost killed her. But he went to reformatory school at 12. He escaped from the Florence Industrial School for White Boys, was the name of it in the 40s, because there was no reformatory for black kids. It was wow. That's South Carolina in the 40s. But He was very small, hence the nickname Pee Wee. And there's no question, he wrote a book in which he talked about when the door got locked at night in that big dormitory, the big boys had their way with him. So, I mean, that would tend to make him a little different, perhaps. He escaped 8 times. One time he went and lived with, traveled with the carnival. I mean, he got caught most of the time. But for instance, one time he escaped. One of the other little boys with him told him he was going back and tried to grab Pee Wee. Pee Wee pulled out a knife and cut his finger off. That's at age 14.
Wow.
When he, at some point, the superintendent of the school said, we need to send him to the state hospital and get him checked out. He's got some mental issues. And we have a copy of, and it's cited in the book, the letter that was written by the superintendent of the school when he sent him and said, this young man obviously has homicidal tendencies and will kill. He was 14 at the time. And that was very prescient because he did kill. And over the years, he worked as a roofer. He worked as a mechanic. He had tremendous skills with mechanical things. And so, beginning in 73 or 4, maybe, 72, 73, 74, he began a series of murders. Not like a serial killer who, like a Ted Bundy or a Dahmer, but he killed, one of the most horrendous killings or murders he committed was he had a former girlfriend show up at his house who was pregnant. And with her, she had a 2-year-old child. And clearly the child was of mixed race. She admitted that she'd been living with a black man and she was pregnant by him. Now, Gaskins had really strict code of conduct as to drugs, race, a number of other things. So he did what he thought was the right thing. And I've asked him about this during at a break during the trial. He took him behind the house, and it was a hot day, and had the pregnant girl sit down on the bank, and he pushed her in the water and drowned her. And then he took a hammer and broke every bone in that 2-year-old's body, and then buried him in the swamp. To him, that was the rational, reasonable thing to do, because they could not, should not, have to live a life that they would have to live as a mixed race child or having had sex with a black man. I mean, we hear that today, but you know, if further back you go in South Carolina history, there was a commonly held perception at one point, and Pee Wee just never gave it up. He had a niece and her friend that he saw him somewhere and they got drunk, and he gave him a ride over to his house to sober him up. And he had a thing for young girls, and his niece walked in while he was trying to get the pants off the 16 or 17-year-old friend of hers, and she screamed or yelled or whatever, and he beat both of them to death and then buried them out in the swamp.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's 13 of them before we get to the case I prosecuted.
Wow.
He was serving 13 life sentences. He'd been sentenced to death on 2 of those. The U.S. Supreme Court declared the death penalty unconstitutional, and he pled guilty to 13 of them to avoid a further trial, a death penalty trial. When he got to CCI, and CCI was a Central Correctional Institute, which was down on the river, actually on the canal. Part of it was built in 1848. It was, when I say horrendous, I spent a lot of time down there. It was something out of a bad gangster movie, but worse. Pee Wee had all these skills. They made him the building man or the head trustee for Cell Block 2, where death row was kept. And he assigned all the other trustees. He had a toolbox, I have it now, with a soldering iron and all the tools you'd need to fix the plumbing or to fix the electrical work, because he did that. And so he had his own cell by himself. He had his own television set in his cell. He was the king of Cell Block 2. And he was contacted through a mutual friend by a guy named Tony Simo. And Simo's parents had been murdered down at the beach in Horry County by a guy named Tyner, who was robbing the store, and he basically executed them during the trial. He's an African American. And Tyner had been tried, sentenced to death. It was reversed, tried again, sentenced to death. And Simo, who felt like he should have been with his parents when, at the time, at the store, not 100 yards from where he lived, was wrought with guilt. And so he reached out to Pee Wee. Pee Wee tape recorded those phone calls. I have them. We played them during the trial, where they're trying to poison him. And again, they never talked about money. I think for Pee Wee it was the challenge, number one, to kill somebody on death row, and two, the racial issue. Black guy killed 2 white people. So, there's a conversation where Pee Wee says, I've been giving him the poison, not doing anything. You get me a stick of dynamite and a blasting cap, there won't be no coming back from that. Simo's response is, well, I can get you some plastic. That's plastic explosive. And of course, they smuggled it in, and about 4 weeks later, Pee Wee concocted a plan and a device that ended up blowing Tyner's head off on death row. I mean, took his head clear off. And so originally, a guy from CCI, investigator Al Waters, called me and said, we had a guy here, it looks like he's trying to blow his way out of death row. But then the forensic FBI showed up, and they found out it was C4, which is military plastic explosive. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, it's everybody went, whoa, how'd you get that? How do you get that into the most secure wing, most secure area, death row, and blow somebody's head off? And so the investigation began, and Waters heard that Pee Wee had something to do with it. So he went to a cell, stripped him naked, took him to another cell, and then they searched everything. There were 35 cassette tapes. He was a Tanya Tucker fan back then. She was 14. Of course, it would be right up his alley. And so I listened. I remember sitting there listening to the tape, listening for the good part. And all I heard, he tape recorded a Tanya Tucker movie, okay? But there were about 30 minutes of conversations with Simo in there, embedded in there, in which he says what he's going to do, what he's been doing, and how he's going to blow him up and kill him. And so he got indicted for that, and we had a 6-week trial. Used to be the longest criminal trial in the history of the state until Murdaugh.
There you go.
Murdaugh now is, so there's been the 2 longest criminal trials in the history of the state. Unfortunately, I've been in both of them.
You've had your hands in them.
Right, prosecuting one, defending the other. And so Pee Wee was so, just friendly, and he walked in, first time he walked into a bond hearing, he's handcuffed and shackled, and he looks over at me and waves and says, "Hi, Dick." And I reflexively said, "Hi, Pee Wee." Now, I've never been on a first name basis as a prosecutor with any criminal, whether it's a housebreaker or murder. I mean, but it became sort of a Pee Wee Dick thing. One day we're in the courtroom on a break, and he's such a good con man. He conned the guards to let him eat his lunch in the courtroom rather than the holding cell. So he's over at this table, the defense table, eating his lunch, and I'm sitting there getting ready for the witness in the afternoon. I hear him saying that high-pitched voice, "Dick, Dick." I said, "What do you want, Pee Wee?" He said, "You know, you're a lot like me." I said, I don't think so. What are you talking about? He said, "You like killing." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You like killing me. You're having fun doing this." And I said, "No, I'm doing my job, which is to seek justice." He said, "You know, I've been in prison most of my life, and in prison, your view of justice is," and he mentioned a specific sexual act, your view of it depends on whether you're giving it or getting it. Okay? And he just chuckled. Now, that did get in my head a little bit. I'm trying to kill him, in effect, get him the death penalty. And I wrestled with the death penalty because it's not, any prosecutor, anybody says to you, "I've pulled the switch," there's something wrong with them. Okay? We're trying to make a decision about whether this person should be eliminated from society. In Pee Wee's case, if not him, who? 13 murders, life, and then he takes this as on a, I don't know, a lark. I mean, it was just the challenge of it, to kill somebody else. So, you know, I've resolved those. If it's an act of self-defense, it was with Pee Wee, and I prosecuted another guy who was sentenced to death. The U.S. Supreme Court reversed it based on an erroneous South Carolina law. It's just anybody, you know, I've been in prosecutors' offices, they got to have a little gallows sitting there. I mean, what is that about? I mean, you're doing your job. And in the book, I talk about talking to my dad, who was a bomber pilot in World War II, B-17, pre-D-Day, bombing Berlin. And yeah, I said to him, you know, that first raid on Berlin, what did you bomb? He said, Berlin. I said, what do you mean? No military target? He said, look, the Germans were bombing London every night, hospitals, schools. So what we were trying to do was get them to pull their fighter away from the channel and defend Berlin and Germany. And it worked because that's how D-Day happened. But he said, you know, when you kill in an act of self-defense, you should not have any moral qualms about that. So that was my attitude. And he told me, he said, you know, if you're doing this as an act of self-defense, you should have no guilt about it whatsoever.
May I also ask, you talk about how your cases impact your personal life.
Yeah.
This case certainly did. You wrote about that in your book.
After Gaskins was sentenced to death, 2 weeks before he was to be executed, he had his son visit him, a guy named, obviously, Donnie. And he convinced Donnie that he could avoid being executed if Donnie would kidnap my 4-year-old daughter, hold her hostage, put her in the trunk of the car, and call me and ask me and tell me that they're going to do away with my daughter if I didn't have him brought up to my office, not to say anything to anybody. And I mean, you got to give Pee Wee credit. He knew that if I called down to the Department of Corrections as a solicitor and said, bring Gaskins up to my office, and then asked them to step out, if he was shackled or whatever, step outside. I had a door nobody knew about, apparently Gaskins did, that he could have walked out of. And so, unfortunately for them, Donnie went and talked to a friend of his to try to recruit him to help. That friend immediately went to Billy Barnes, a sheriff over there in Florence. And I got a call, where's your daughter? Well, she's at school. Go get her,
Right.
which we did. And then we lived with SLED agents guarding us for the next 2 weeks until he was executed. But that will chill your ardor for being a prosecutor when you realize there are people out there that will hurt your family to get to you. So Gaskins, I mean, if you're looking for somebody who's evil, who had no compunction, matter of fact, I think he enjoyed killing. I know he enjoyed killing. He told me he enjoyed killing. So he was, and the book, what I'm proud about in the book is, it's a little bit about me, how I got to where I was in that 1983 trial, and how Pee Wee got there. So it's how we end up together and how it affected him. Obviously, he ended up dying, but and how it affected me and my family. I'm proud of this book. It's something I thought about 40 years ago, and finally.
Pen to paper.
Yeah, you can tell that story.
Well, but you got to tell it in a way that people want to read. It's not, and that's why Sean Assel, who's my best buddy now, he was a New York Times bestseller writer, helped me shape that into something that you want to read. I hope you want to read it. It's not dry. It's not. I think there's some shocking stuff in there that, as we went through and read all the material we had, I'd forgotten about. It sort of was an aside. After the trial, after the execution in '91, I was a solicitor here, and the clerk of court came to me and said, look, we got all these exhibits from the trial, which they hold on to as long as there's a chance of an appeal. And now that Gaskins has been executed, we're getting ready to throw them out, which is what we normally do. Do you want them? Oh, yeah. So that stuff has sat in a warehouse for 30 years. I started going through it.
Wow.
I mean, Gaskins gave a 3-day, 500-page transcribed confession to all 13 murders, details, which if that was the only copy, if it had been chunked, no one would have a record of it. But in constructing the book, we had the advantage of hearing what Gaskins said he did, what he did with the body, what, and then of course there were other witnesses. So where there was, we always assumed Pee Wee might not have been telling the whole truth, but he admitted to the murders, and other witnesses corroborated some of it. And then, I think we sort of show that his version may not have been accurate sometimes, but just
two lives coming in together. Wow. And this is coming out Tuesday, December 16th.
Right. You can pre-order it now on your favorite website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's a number of them.
And the audiobook.
Yes.
And there is an audiobook version.
And there's an audiobook version which the
Voice.
publisher wanted me to do because it's autobiographical, and
Right.
they said people like the subject to hear that subject read the story if they can. Now, I have tremendous respect. Let me make sure everybody understands this. Tremendous respect for people that do that for a living, because it is not easy. It is trying to deliver it, and I had a great engineer, recording studio guy, who would stop me and say, no, that's a comma. You're supposed to stop, hesitate, move on, or emphasize this word. It took 14 hours.
Wow.
We didn't do it straight. We broke it up into 2-hour sessions, but went to a studio in Charlotte on 6 or 7 times and did it. Don't want to do that again.
I was going to say, but here it is.
Here it is.
Here it is.
Here it is.
It's out there in paperback, and it's also going to be on the audiobook as well. Again, that's all happening on Tuesday, December 16th.
Correct. And we'll be at a bookstore near you after that. We're going to Charleston to Buxton Books on Wednesday night, and then we'll be in Florence, Pee Wee's hometown, on Thursday to sign books at Jack's Books, and then New Orleans. So we'll be all over.
All over the place there.
Okay.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us about all of this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. All right, we're going to be putting this full interview as well on our website, WLTX.com, also on WLTX Plus.